Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Happy to see you guys on this Friday, the 10th of March, and welcome to the Localization Fireside Chat this morning. I am honored and pleased to have with me Carrie Fischer. Carrie Fischer, thanks for joining me this morning. A little bit about Carrie, just to give you a bit of an introduction, so everybody who doesn't know you, which I assume everybody knows you, but just to give you a little bit of an introduction. Carrie Fischer is the Globalization Service Manager at Subway. Subway is headquartered in Milford, Connecticut. She's responsible for all globalization-related strategies for the company. She has over 28 years of experience in the localization industry. She has held various positions related to the localization industry in, for example, bodybuilding.com, Hyperion, which is Oracle, and Transparent Language. She's a volunteer at Women in Localization. Actually, she's the president of the Women in Localization Association. Congratulations, Carrie. And the co-chair for the Women in Leadership, ERG, and a mentor. Her passion includes helping others and continually learning in order to grow personally and professionally. And thank you, Carrie, again for coming online with me this morning and recording this podcast and the video broadcast.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
And just to start the conversation, I guess, Carrie, how did you get into the localization business? What drove you to, what passion stirred inside of you to be in the localization industry? What got you here? You must have a story.
Like a lot of people, back in the day, when localization was not a term that people even knew or understood what it meant. When I was working for Transparent Language, we sold software that helped people learn different languages. So we sold, I think, French, Spanish, German, and Japanese. And it was a unique way for people to learn a language by reading text, by reading stories, by reading articles. And then we took that concept and kind of flipped it and said, well, why don't we take this concept, sell it in French-speaking countries, German-speaking countries, Spanish-speaking, and Japan. And then we realized, well, we have to translate this software somehow, and all the menu items and the user guide, the box. Back in the day, it was software, right? And the company was like, well, who's going to do this? And I said, well, I will. And that's how I got into it. And back then there was no Google, there's no search engines. You kind of flipped through the yellow page, found translation companies, and they did the rest. There was no concept of translation memory. It was just starting. Back in the 90s, it was just starting, but. That's how I got into it. So it started with the passion for languages. I have a degree in French. I took Spanish, I took Russian in college. It was just, and so this was a natural progression to get into this great opportunity of a foreign language learning software program, and then having to localize it in 94 or whatever it was, 95. That's how I fell into the industry, and went to my first Lisa conference in Boston, and you remember Lisa, right?
I do.
And that's where I met, this huge figure of a person, Renato Beninato, and Karina. It was really interesting. It was a great experience, great introduction to the localization industry.
Funny you mentioned the names that we commonly know and we commonly come across, and and some people in our industry, they have so much passion that resonates with you. I know you and I talked only probably once or twice, but every conversation we've had, it resonated with me because there's so much passion in our hearts for the industry and for the people that we want to help, and this is what localization services is about, is to help others understand and communicate.
Yeah, we're all the same birds of a feather, right? We all have this. You're right. It's the same passion, and I think that's why we all get along, and we all love to work with each other, and it's been a great industry to get into. And when young people come to me and say, what is localization? What is the industry? I'm like, well, let me tell you about it.
Well, great. I know you have you became a president. You were for the Women in Localization. Tell me a little bit about that and your vision for the association, and where do you see the association? What do you like to accomplish in the short term, long term, etc.? What's your view on this, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I got into Women in Localization when it was first formed in 2008. I happened to live in Silicon Valley at the time, and we started to get together informally, meeting at people's houses or people's places of work or bars or and very specifically talking about issues that affected us as women and how they're different than issues that affect men. We have sometimes this double-edged sword of, if somebody calls us, assertive, we're kind of seen as bitchy, or whereas if a man is seen as assertive and going for what he wants, well, he's assertive. It's a good thing, So and if you become a mom, God forbid, there's the what's called the mommy penalty, and so we have different issues that aren't addressed, and why would they be, with a mixture of men and women in the room. So the three founders, saw a need for just women to get together and understand specific challenges, wins, and it became something I really enjoyed. It was a celebration of other people's accomplishments and learning from their challenges. And then I became a board member, the first board member in 2011, I think. And but then I moved to Idaho for a job, and there was no concept of chapters. It was Northern California Women in Localization. And then when I got back into it a few years ago, we had 9 programs. There was like 26 chapters throughout the world. I was like, what? I had not kept up with it. And someone brought me back in, Kristen Gutierrez, and said, hey, would you want to get back into Women in Loc and, work in my program? I'm like, program? What are you talking about? So it was so great to see how far it had come. We're such a virtual global organization now. And I kind of had different positions. So I started as a liaison, liaising between a couple of different programs. And then they asked me to be the Americas Geo manager. So I wouldn't manage the Americas chapters. I would just help them if they needed help and coach them and guide them. And then the program director of Global Community, which was newly formed a couple years ago. Then the board member, the board sponsor of Global Community, and then I was asked to be the president for 2023. So, wow.
I know.
Exciting.
So what a journey. So congratulations. It's
Thank you.
a great achievement. And you can see the trajectory when you have passion into something. I was doing a podcast yesterday, and somebody was asking me, like, what is your advice for success? I said, you got to have passion about what you're doing. I mean, if you don't have passion, then it's how do you determine passion? So that's the second question, the follow-up question. So how do you determine passion? So ask yourself the question, can you do it for free? Oh, but everybody needs to make money. I said, well, that's okay. Everybody needs to make money. But just when you're thinking by yourself, driving or getting a coffee together, just ask yourself a question. This job that you're in, would you do it for free? And if the answer is yes, that means you're in the right job. Of course, you're going to get paid. People are going to pay you salaries. That's not going to go anywhere. But you got to do some soul searching to become successful. And you've demonstrated that. You're a big evidence of this. The second question I have
it took me a while to understand what my passion was. And it's when I started volunteering again that I realized, oh my God, I love this. I love mentoring. I love giving back and volunteering. And it took me in, I'm 54. It took me into my 50s to understand why we were kind of put here, right?
That's right.
I think we're here to be of service, and
Right.
it takes maturity and age, I think, to finally
Mhm.
figure that out. But I'm
Yeah.
trying to instill it in the younger generation
And
too.
you know what? We're on the same wavelength thing. One of the things I did not mention earlier in this conversation is the purpose of this channel is to give back. Because it's not sponsored by anybody. It's me doing it, on in addition to all the other responsibilities that I have. And, I feel like this industry has been so good to me over the years.
Yes.
And I would like to, hopefully these conversations that we're having today somebody will benefit from them down the road. And this is why the whole purpose is about this one. And you notice that, the young generation that's coming into the industry, the technology they're using, the process they're using, it's a little different than what you and I have seen over the years and how the industry has progressed. And they need something, I believe. The new generation is going to be replaced us at some point. They need
Yep.
something to look for and say, oh, okay, so I have a couple of nuggets of wisdom here that I can borrow, and this is the purpose of this channel.
I love it. Thank you for
So
doing it.
so on your side, from what would be your short-term goals for women in localization in the next few months, a year, however you portray that?
Yeah. Um, Mentoring is a big passion of mine. And one of the uh, committees, teams under Global Community is mentorship. And so we are launching at the end of this month or first week of April, a mentoring software program for all of our members. It's automatic, right? So there's algorithms involved. We're not sitting here with spreadsheets like we used to do. Um, and mentors and mentees can be automatically matched. And then you get to chat with that person, meet with that person, see if it's a fit, um, and then determine, how long you want to meet for and how often. And so all that will be automated. I think that's going to be huge for our members, because I get asked all the time, from new people entering the space, localization space, what are your top 3 tips? My first tip is find a mentor who's been in the industry at least 10 years. It's important, I think, to have some history there. Unless potentially you're in sales, right? And maybe it's more about sales techniques. But anyway, um, so that's one, I think, huge thing for our members. This year, we're going to focus on other nonprofits, have a little philanthropy effort and give back to other communities that are struggling, especially those in need, young girls, young women who don't have access to basic hygienic, you know, products, let's say.
Mhm.
And, giving them the ability to continue to go to school and learn, no matter what time of the month that is. It's really important. And right now there's so many young women struggling with that basic need, and I think we take that for granted in this country, and first world countries. So um, there's going to be that. We're doing a lot of internal things. We have an amazing board, and Olga Beregovaya, who is the VP and the board sponsor of technology, uh, incredibly innovative, and all the things that we've wanted to do for the last few years are now coming to fruition. Whether it's internal training, we have an intranet. Oh my gosh, we don't have
Good.
to email somebody to onboard them. It's now just a function within the intranet. You click this, you click that, you fill something out, and the NDA is signed. It's amazing. So those are just a few things that are coming up, and of course we'll always have the events, the virtual events from Global Community, and we're focusing on different parts of the country. So our next event is going to be about India. We're going to have an event around the Arabic speaking countries and
Mhm.
even Africa, because that's in the next what billion users, is that what they're calling it? It's so for us, it's about empowering the women in those locations, and um, as well as learning about the industry itself in those particular locations.
Of course. So, in summary, you like to support, and it's very admirable, by the way, great goal to reach out to the unfortunate and the people who do not have what you said, we take for granted sometimes here in the Western world, and to support the women in those locations. You see some things, your heart bleeds for it, and you can't sit idle. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that women in localization, championed by you, Carrie, to take that big task, that big goal on, and if nothing else, to bring awareness, to support, to help to the issues that they're facing, women are facing in those countries or in those regions.
Yeah.
Some of them, for a variety of reasons, lack of education, policies, systems, whatever they are. We all, at the end of the day, human, deserve to be treated as equal as a human, regardless of where you live.
Yeah, and regardless of gender. And I think you're right. Education is the key to,
100%.
yeah.
100%. So thank you for this. Moving on to another topic, which you and I have touched on before, and it's sort of like I mentioned earlier, some of the conversation we had, you have tons of conversation during the day and during the month and the year, but some of them, they stick with you, right? So one of them that stuck with me quite a bit when you and I initially talked, and that was my first introduction conversation with you, is the unconscious bias. And you sounded very passionate about this topic. For those the audience with us this morning, they don't know what unconscious bias is. I did some Google search and I found the exact definition of what that is. So I'll read it quickly. So
Okay.
people who are not familiar with it, they at least get the brain in the right frame of mind on this one. Unconscious bias or implicit bias is a term that describes the associations we hold as a human, as people, outside of our conscious awareness and control.
Yeah.
Unconscious bias affects everyone. Unconscious bias is triggered by our brain automatically making quick judgments and assessments on things or items that we probably haven't had a chance to even examine or understand clearly. So based on this definition and based on your deep understanding of the topic, you're very involved in this. Tell me a little bit more of your views on unconscious bias and how do we resolve something like this? I know education targets everything, but in your mind, is there an actionable items that people can do, our listeners can do?
Yeah.
Maybe a book they can read, maybe a blog, maybe something that they can practice in their daily life to reduce the chances that we unconsciously practicing biases against somebody.
Isn't it horrible that we all have this? This was an eye opener for me as well. I didn't know what unconscious bias was until a few years ago, and I started digging as well, and one of the events that we held last year was with a woman named Hilary Bass, who, researches this and presents on it, just to bring awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's horrifying to think that we have these, disposed prejudices, but we all have them. And there's actually a test you can take provided by Harvard. And so if you Google IAT test Harvard, you can take it, and it's private, right? And the results don't go out to the internet, right? But you can see kind of where you are on the spectrum of unconscious bias. And really, I think how to get over it is to be aware of it, to educate yourself on it, and then as you make decisions, maybe it's about hiring, or maybe it's about a proposal that somebody has proposed. As you make your decision, ask yourself, you know, do I have a bias here? You need to check yourself and not, it's really easy, I think, to go with something called confirmation bias. And you dig up evidence that support the bias that you already have. It's hard not to.
Mhm.
Ask people to call you out on it, and if they see it. And I think there's comfort in knowing that everybody has this, whether it be about, female, male, people of color, whatever it is, we've all got something that is potentially, holding us back from being more inclusive or, uh, equity equal type of thing. So some other things, something that Subway did, which I absolutely love, is we created employee resource groups, so ERGs. And I don't know how many we have. We have a lot. And I just happen to be this year the co-chair of the Women in Leadership ERG. And we're the largest group. We're the largest ERG within Subway. And we get together every other week. We talk about, the challenges that we face. We get speakers in as well. But just recognizing that there are different groups that people identify with within your own company, and breaking down the barriers that others have. So we have a Latinx, we have LGBTQA, we've got, people of color, we've got young professionals, and more groups are formed all the time. And I think just talking about these types of things and the challenges that we face help break down our own unconscious biases that we've got, and attending other people's events. India puts together an amazing event every year, and I look forward to it every year. It's talking about the stereotypes that they deal with all the time. Yeah, those are the things that I can think of to help people with their own unconscious bias. Just knowing that we have them is really important, and acknowledging them. And it's okay. Just work on getting it better.
And one would wonder, like, how, if I mean, I know people, like various people go various things through life, and they along the way, they gather in their subconscious a variety of experiences and a variety of memories, etc., which they form the basis of judgment down the road, right? So
Totally.
they can, that's how they judge.
Yes.
So in one thing, it's almost like you need an eraser to erase all these negativities that you've carried along, and maybe not negativity, maybe positive things, I don't know, but maybe things that they're implicating how you behave now, maybe implicating how you make decisions today in a neutral way, not necessarily because somebody has a certain skin tone, you automatically categorize them in a certain way. That makes no sense at all.
But that's what we do. We categorize people. We can't help it. We all do it.
That's right. So it does bring the point of almost reformatting, and being a tech guy, reformatting the hard drive of somebody's head now or brain, to make sure that, what you've learned when you were young, put that aside. And now you gotta be you gotta approach life and approach decisions, specifically in business. You cannot afford in business to be viewed as one-sided on any subject, on any topic. So it is one of those, especially in the localization business, where we serve a variety of demographics, languages, countries. It just makes no sense.
I know. I read a statistic that due to the unconscious female gender bias, we're losing out globally on $28 trillion because women are not promoted to certain levels in companies, and they have so much to offer and are better at some things.
Oh, I know, 100%. I agree with you. I mean, if we were to capitalize on the human talent, female, male equally,
Minorities. I mean, yeah,
we would
yes,
solve a whole bunch of problems in
we
society.
really would. Yeah. You
No, thanks for highlighting this topic. I really appreciate it. Now, moving on to a next topic, which is you've been in the localization business for a while. You've seen the localization business from the beginning of manual everything to
yes.
now we're talking about more automation, more hybrid environment, and sometimes pure tech environment.
Yeah.
Question number one is, what's your view on our progression as an industry? And where do you see technology down the road from an evolution perspective? And what role does the human play in all this?
Gosh, that's huge.
I know, eh? Sorry, I should break the question into several pieces, but you
It's
target
good.
from anywhere you want.
Okay. So you're right. From 28 years ago when everything was manual and, my email address was a bunch of numbers at CompuServe.com or whatever the heck it was. That was that was my email address.
Oh, I remember those guys.
And then came AOL and, everybody else. But and so, from looking up translation companies in the yellow pages, in a phone book, to the internet, today it's just a Google search away to find 150 companies that do what you're looking for someone to do. I only see that as continuing, and as we get better at figuring out how to manage the technology and what it can be used for, things will only get, I think, faster, potentially better, and potentially cheaper. The big buzzword is Chat GPT, right? And so I actually attended something last week where, 4 experts in the technology field, which I am not, by the way, talked about Chat GPT and the different uses for it potentially in the future. So of course, my kid, I was so glad that I actually knew what Chat GPT was when my 16-year-old son said, "Mom, have you heard of this thing called Chat GPT?" Why, yes, I have, because it's usually him teaching me about what's happening in the world of tech. But he's absolutely fascinated by it and loves to challenge it. But anyway, so I think it's harnessing new technologies. There's going to be new stuff coming up all the time. And it's just a matter of figuring out how it can work for our industry. And, which companies are going to harness it first. And there's probably so many different ways to do this. So I see that, but I can't help but look at my own experience within Subway, and I am seeing more and more people interpreting services needed. Even in Quebec, the new law passed last year,
and Bill 96, the famous one.
96, yes, which is costing me a lot of money. No,
and you're not the only one.
No, I know, and quite frankly, I mean, it should be. I'm sorry, I kind of side with them on this, but so what I'm seeing is the more and more need for in-person, Zoom, whatever, interpreters, and a Chat GPT I don't think is ever going to replace that. So I see just a combination of both technology and people will never be out of the loop ever.
You're absolutely correct. I wrote a blog 3 years ago, way before Chat GPT became hip, I would call it now.
It is hip
thing now. And I always advocated to the fact that the language industry will always live in a hybrid environment, meaning that you need technology and you need a human. And
Yes.
for various reasons, you need them. You need them to customize. If it's pure technology, you still need the linguist or the translator, the professional translator, to customize, to tailor, to make sure that to inspect, to make sure that the machine, I should stop calling the machine now. People are going to think I'm talking about Star Trek, but to make sure that the technology is doing what it's supposed to be doing and accurately doing it. And you're never ever going to lose that, because for certain topics, I get it. For certain low visibility content, I
Yes.
completely. But if you have a high visibility content and you have a content that is sensitive to a certain extent, legal, etc., pharmaceutical, healthcare, etc., you still
Absolutely.
need somebody to validate this. You cannot afford a mistake in those texts.
Can you imagine if we translated our menus using AI? You know, Subway series, how would that translate into, however many languages? And even, is a board ever going to be replaced by robots? No, it's people. But we use technology, like I said, Olga has been really helping us harness the technology so it makes our volunteer jobs easier. That's how I see it, as this symbiotic, relationship.
And you know what? It's creating a new way of working in the localization industry. It's creating new skills.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
I was talking to somebody yesterday or the day before, I can't remember now, and we were talking about the academia and the academic function that the university play in terms of supplementing the industry with professional skills to help and to drive the industry forward. But those programs have not really, to a large extent. I mean, some universities are adapting, but for the most of it, we're still following, a 4-year degree program from, 30, 40 years ago. And now the technology that's coming online, the new, and it's not just the industry is forcing it. I mean, the consumer of those translation of the content is forcing it to a large extent. I was to adopt a new technology, to look for new ways to do things, right? So that's going to force now academia to tailor degrees specifically for those functions. So for instance, instead of coming in as a professional translator, you may be coming out of university as a post editor.
Yeah.
Maybe coming
Or a
up
project
as a
manager or a technology person. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's going to open the door to look for to get more resources, because this industry, like any other industry, is starving for resources.
Yeah.
So it's going to get some resources in. They're more qualified to the new environment, instead of taking an individual that was not professionally trained for this and now asking them to train for the new environment. I think they find it a little hard, and you know the story there. Change is very hard to some of our industry professionals, because it's not their fault, because they were not really designed for it, for the lack of a better word. They were not trained for it. That's not what they went to university for.
Right.
God bless them. I mean, some of the ones that I've known, and they're retired, but they still do some translation work. Some of them, they still tell me about the days when they do translation using typewriters. So, take that environment and put them into Chat GPT. That's going to be a big change.
Yeah, that is a big change. And it's, even with these tracks, and I'll cite MISS, right? The Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California. It's a graduate school. It's a 2-year program, but they have different tracks that people can, take. If you want to be a linguist, you take this. If you want to be project manager, you take this. If you want to have a career in localization technology, which is great. But this challenge still remains when they get out with that degree. They don't have 2 years experience that everybody seems to require on the job applications. They don't have 1 million words translated, if they're going to go down the linguist path. So, I also think it's up to us as industry veterans to help them bridge that gap, whatever that might be, whether it's a paid internship, whether it's mentoring and giving projects, at the same time to help them learn about, TMS in the real world.
Yeah, there are several associations that they're launching. I know you mentioned mentoring earlier, that Women in Localization are going to be launching, but there are several associations here in Canada. We use mentoring program quite a bit.
Good.
So when they graduate from university, they go under mentorship with a company or with whoever, maybe an enterprise that has an internal localization team, etc. So the idea there is to indoctrinate them and to give them a little bit of a training on the new world, on the world that they did not see at university, and they need to.
Right.
There's a co-op programs. There's a bunch of things, right? But
Excellent.
that transition period that you mentioned between learning and being a professional in the industry is quite important.
Yeah,
And this is where people like us need to help through this.
I completely agree. And it's scary. It's scary for people graduating and going, now what?
No,
This is where we can
absolutely,
help them.
absolutely. So, the last question I have is there any future plans for you? What's the big ideas that you would like to chase in the next couple of years for Carrie Fischer?
Oh boy. uh, I'd like to continue to volunteer. Women in localization is near and dear to my heart, so I imagine I'll continue to volunteer there. In terms of my career, let me put it this way: I don't tend to leave a company unless I'm no longer challenged. And let me tell you, at Subway, the challenges never end. So I see myself there for quite a long time. I love it because it's constantly changing, to be honest, and there's a new challenge to overcome. To be honest, I have some old challenges that I still need to figure out. But so maybe in the short term, I'll stay at Subway. I still love it, although we are for sale. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, the owners decided to sell the company. I think we're valued at $10 billion. So if you have that in your wallet, you might be able to buy us. I really, because I like helping different people, I can see myself someday maybe freelancing, going, I do have my own consulting company, which is dormant right now. As you can imagine, I have enough to do, but
Sure.
the ability to help different companies with their globalization needs is attractive to me. So maybe down the road, that's what I'll do.
Well, I'm sure whatever you decide to do, you'll be a great success as you are right now, Carrie. And again, I want to thank you for taking part of this conversation this morning. And I know it's early in Idaho, so thank you again. I hope you come
Welcome.
back, and we'll have another conversation in a few months and get updated on what would I call the status of the industry. I always love to share your views with our audience. That'd be great.
And if you could take the CSA research survey that just launched, we partnered with CSA, and it's gender, family, and all that stuff. The last time it was out there was 2017. So it's always good to get new, data for our
Yeah.
industry and
Yeah.
figure out where we are. So
For our
that's a
audience
plug,
or in the
total plug.
localization, yeah, I know. I love that. I love that plug there for CSA research survey. So for those audience who are listening to us from the localization industry this morning, please take the CSA survey, okay? And if you haven't done so already. Again, thank you, Carrie, for being part of this podcast. For our audience, you can find us on YouTube on Localization Fireside Chat. You can also find us on Spotify podcast at Localization Fireside Chat as well. Thank you, Carrie. Thanks for our listeners, and thank you for joining me this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.